You know, we never know the impact we can have on someone's life. Just one person, an individual. Sometimes we think our interaction with people doesn't make a difference. But then sometimes that impact comes at just the right moment, when everything aligns when you're needed most. And that person sometimes that steps into someone's life could be kind of considered like an angel that was sent to make a difference. Well, hi, I'm Eric with Island Expats. I want to tell you a video about my dad, something that happened not that long ago, about 6 months ago. And I want to tell you about this story about a man named Angel, who was a caregiver who came into our lives. And he totally lived up to his name. He came in for the last 6 weeks of my dad's life. We had no idea that we were there. We relied upon Angel to get us through that time, to know what to expect, how to care for my dad. And he came into our lives at just the right moment when we needed him the most. And we had no idea that my dad was about to leave us. So back in the summer of 2023, things began to change for my dad. He had been so independent all of his 92 years. He had this brilliant mind, and he did so many different things with rockets in space and measuring distances with lasers from the Earth to the moon and back, all kinds of things that he did in aerospace. You know, he was a bit of a creative genius. He could apply concepts in science in order to solve problems. He was a research scientist, and so there wasn't like there was a rule book to follow when there was a problem. He was given a task, and he'd have to creatively solve it and come up with, okay, how do we fix this particular problem? And those skill sets also related very well for him to create his own version of classical music on the piano. I remember for years, you know, he would play just the classics. He wouldn't play anything else. Like, he never played like Happy Birthday to You. It would be Bach or Beethoven or his own works. They were very complicated stuff. But he was always active. He kept this mind going. He used it like a muscle to solve problems. I've never seen anyone use their mind as much as he did. I remember giving him a problem. There was something with the electrical circuit in the house wasn't working right. And I went and explained it to him. And he just sat there for an hour thinking about it, never getting out of his chair. And I came back an hour later, he told me how to solve it. He never even got up. I mean, for me, I got to get up and look at the problem and see what it is. He didn't have to. Well, as my dad aged, especially in his 92nd year, he really began needing more assistance with his daily routines, even though mentally he was very, very sharp. And though he developed some mobility issues, he still could get around the house. He had a walker, and I kind of laughed because it was like carbon fiber or something with like bright red, like a little race walker or something like that. But what happened was he would kind of stay in his easy chair. He had back issues and several other health problems, and he didn't move much, and that led to pressure sores, and those pressure sores ended up causing us a lot of problems. If you know a loved one that's struggling with that, do all you can to keep that from progressing, because that was a big part of our story here, that my dad began to lose his mobility and his choices because the doctors wanted him to get a higher level of care for these pressure sores that could, potentially get infected and cause other issues. Well, my mom had been his primary caregiver and had just been a diligent caregiver for years, taking care of him, making sure his medications were right, taking care of his meals. We had a set schedule. Breakfast was at 7, lunch was at noon, and dinner was at 6, and we lived to that, and certain medications at certain times. And now I understand why they have those pill boxes that say, like, Monday through Sunday, and then you put the medications in there. When they get older like this, there's a lot of medications to regulate blood pressure and all these other things. So my mom was the primary one that took care of him. And then as they kind of aged a little bit more here, in the last year, I stepped in to help and get them through this difficult time because my dad was 6'2" and 180 pounds. And weekly, probably twice a week, we either had nurses or the physical therapist stop by and check on him and see how he was doing and give the care that he needed, because he pretty much didn't leave the house anymore. That's kind of where we landed. Well, at one point, after one of the doctor visits with one of the nurses, the nurse touched base with this doctor, who was a very good doctor for us. She was young, but very, very smart. And after conferring with the nurse, she said, you know what, these pressure sores are kind of changing color, and it's not what we want. And the doctor felt that he needed a higher level of care and needed to go to the hospital for a few weeks to get these things improved upon. And not knowing any different, thinking it was the right thing, we said okay, and so we arranged a trip to the hospital. Well, unfortunately, the hospital stay did not go well. I don't know why. This is still a frustration today for me. But the first 4 or 5 days, they never got him out of bed. And you can't do that. With an old person, you have got to get them up and move, even if it's a walker, a cane, whatever. Otherwise, they'll decline very quickly, and that's exactly what happened. Then you come in there, and instead of having your primary doctors, your cardiologist, and all these people you're used to dealing with, they have the hospitalist, we call the hospitalist, right, the doctor at the hospital, and they're highly qualified. But for whatever reason, they completely changed his medication routine. Now, my dad had a lot of back problems and a lot of pain. And so he was on pain management. We had to really carefully watch this stuff. We had our own routine how we managed this. And my dad, being as bright and alert as he was, he would help manage it too. It was kind of complicated. Well, the doctors changed all this, and they messed it all up. And because of that, he began to lose his mobility altogether. In fact, up to this point in his 92 years, he was continent. When he went to the hospital, he was continent. He had free reign of the house. In fact, it was funny. A couple of times we were getting nervous because we would tell him, Dad, if we're not here, don't go out the front door. Because he'd take his walker and he'd go down the steps, click, 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 and he'd go out to the garage because he had like a lathe that he used to do machining on. And he just kind of as a hobby, and he'd check on his things. And so I get it, he wanted to see what's going on in the garage, but we were like sweating, and he's going down these stairs to get to the garage out in front. So we asked him, hey, Dad, could you not do that? Or if you want to go, let one of us go with you. So he had free mobility of the house. He not only could walk across the room, he could walk into the kitchen, he could walk down the hall to the bathroom. He didn't usually need our help for any of that stuff. But this hospital stay, as frustrating as it is, within days, changed all of that. And he became incontinent. And at 6'2" and 180 pounds, that was going to be a big change for our lives. And his dependence upon us and others, where the story is going to go about a guy named Angel, who was this caregiver that came in and helped us. And at one point, I said to my dad, Dad, we need to get you home. They're going to kill you in here. Your deterioration's happening so fast, and we just weren't there. And they really didn't help him with the bed sores all that much. So I guess the big difference was at home we bandaged them up and put special creams and medication on them and checked them every day. In the hospital, they just have them in the hospital gown, and then they put some type of cream, but they didn't put the bandages. And maybe that's the right thing to do. I'm not qualified to answer that question, but it was just very different. I just know that he no longer could get up and move around. And it took about a week before we finally got him up out of the bed. And by then, he could barely walk across the hospital room. Big problem. In fact, at the end of this 3-week hospital stay, they required us to sign this liability waiver stating that they really weren't able to help him. So it was really, really frustrating. And it's a good quality hospital. Well, before going to the hospital, with my dad's kind of medical conditions, we pretty much just did meal preparation and then managed his medication. That's kind of what we did. And then he could kind of do the rest. I mean, he was busy all day working on his laptop, doing different things. But after this hospital stay, his decline was so significant. And I remember if I go back about 10 or 15 years ago, my dad had caught his foot on something walking down the hallway, and he fell and he broke his femur. So he was in the hospital for about a week. In fact, it was kind of a crazy thing. Now that I think about it, he went in there for the femur break. Well, let me finish that part of the story. Then it was crazy what happened next. So he's in the hospital bed and he's very uncomfortable. And the physical therapist shows up and says, "You got to get up and walk." He's like, "I just broke my femur. I broke my leg." And the guy said, "You want to live? You got to get up and walk every day." And he was very serious about it. Well, now I understand. Because if you have an elderly person in a bed and they don't get up and move each day, they lose their mobility. And that's exactly what happened. The part of the story that I wanted to mention to you was that when my dad went into the hospital, this is kind of crazy how things work sometimes. When my dad went into the hospital for this broken femur, he was there for a week. And then at the end of the week, I got a call from my sibling saying, "Hey, something's going on with Dad. He's not doing well. In fact, it seems like it's a heart issue or something like that." And so I was working, and so my brother and my sister were there, and they were helping to take care of him. And when I got there, they said, "Okay, your turn," and kind of tag team, So I stayed with him for 48 hours, and what I began to realize is that his heart was just really failing. They had moved him into ICU, and they had him on one of these external pacemakers. And I told the cardiologist, because I was watching the charts, there's like this monitor in the room, and you see the lines go up and down. I was watching the blood pressure and everything. And what would happen is his blood pressure would drop, and he would hallucinate, and he would say, "Hey, who's that lady sitting on the ceiling?" Or, they have like those acoustical tiles, and they have like those little dots into them for sound or something. Or maybe it's just a look, whatever that is. Well, at one point, he thought they were ants, and they were all crawling on the ceiling. So he began to hallucinate. And then when his external pacemaker they hooked up kicked in and brought his heartbeat back up, then he immediately came back, and he stopped hallucinating. So I told the cardiologist, I said, "Man, you turn off that external pacemaker, he's going to die." And the cardiologist, who was very well qualified, he's like, no, that can't be. Well, they ordered him a pacemaker, and when it came in, they went to do the surgery, and they went to turn off the external pacemaker, and sure enough, his heart stopped. So they were able to fix it, but it was, life-threatening. It was a pretty crazy time. So let's go back to our story here before Angel the caregiver joined us. When my dad was doing better before he went into this last 3-week hospital stay, and he still had mobility, and he was cruising around the house in his walker. When the 4th of July came this last summer, my sister was having a party at her house, and we had not really left for sometimes a week or two because he needed, just to have someone there with him. And so we decided, it's 4th of July. Maybe we can go watch the fireworks. And so we talked to Dad. He's like, "I'm fine. Don't worry about me. Go enjoy the day and then come back." So we go and we watch the fireworks, and then we come back. And then when I unlock the front door, I just have the feeling like something's not right. And I hear in a faint voice from my dad, "Help, can you come and help me?" Well, my poor dad, he had walked down the hallway with his walker like he normally does. And when he went to use the restroom, he went to the bathroom counter, and he put his hand out to balance himself. And when he did that, he missed. And at 6'2" and 180 pounds, he came crashing down to the floor. And that's where we found him, lying on the floor. So at that point, I talked to my mom, and I said, I don't know that we should move him. There might be something really hurt here. Plus, I don't know if I can get him up off the floor and into like a sitting type position. So we called the paramedics, and they came, and it took 3 young firefighters to get him up and onto a gurney, and they agreed. He was a little bruised. They said, "Let's go ahead and take him to the hospital." So they did. And at the hospital, they said, well, he's got some bruises and things, but we think he's okay. Well, once again, they missed something. And about a week later, his primary care doctor was reviewing his x-rays from the fall. Not that she had to. She was more like, just a general practitioner. But she went back and reviewed the x-rays. and she saw that there was a fractured collarbone. And so we then went back to the hospital and said, hey, you guys need to address this. And so they finally did. Well, at that point, a friend of mine owns a caregiving agency, and we had been in contact with her. And we said, look, we need caregivers. We need to kind of get a routine going here. My dad is just needing a higher level of care. And the more that he stayed in the hospital, the more that he's losing his mobility. So the first two caregivers is quite a story of what happened. Neither one of them worked out, but it's more the reasons why they didn't work out beyond us and even beyond the caregivers. If you get the chance, take a look at this other video that's on my channel. It's called What's Up with Filipino Caregivers, and it tells this incredible story of what happened with the first two. You can't make this stuff up. You wouldn't believe it until you watch it. That video is only a month old and has over 100,000 views. So it's a pretty good story. So if you get a chance, go check out What's Up with Filipino Caregivers. Well, after 2 failed attempts of trying to find a caregiver named Angel came available. And he's a Filipino man in his early 50s, very gentle, very kind, very strong, a great fit for my dad. Because when we asked my dad originally, we had to talk him into this, right? He didn't want to have a caregiver. So, and they weren't going to be there all the time. It was going to be a schedule. We started off at like 4 hours a day to get used to it. I mean, it's a little weird, right? You have your house to yourself, and then all of a sudden somebody comes in every day and they're there 4, 6, 8 hours, whatever it is. And it's just a big change to always have somebody there. So, hopefully you can find somebody you trust and like, right? And that ended up being Angel for us. And he was just the right guy at the right time because he was physically very strong. And he knew the techniques how to move my dad around since he was kind of a taller, bigger guy. And he was so experienced and very soft-spoken and so understanding. And when we had some difficult nights where we needed help, one of them I was on a business trip out of town, and my mom called him, and he came at midnight to help my dad. He was just an extraordinary individual, very committed to us, and we had hired him right before my dad actually went into the hospital. And then he was on hold for the 3 weeks, and he waited for us, and then he came over and helped us. He actually came by the hospital. He didn't have to, but he wanted to meet my dad and get to know him. That's just the type of person he was. And it was a good thing because he began to build this relationship with my dad. And he really taught us how to better care for my dad. Some of the techniques in order to move him from one place to another and all the things that needed to be done. In fact, at one point, my dad was getting very uncomfortable, and we didn't realize he was in his final days. And we asked Angel, are these symptoms of something coming? And Angel would give his opinion based upon his experience, and we trusted him. And so we knew that we were getting a little closer to the end, but we didn't know how close we were. And in one of those moments, my dad was trying to get a hold of my mom, and he's calling on the landline. He didn't have a cell phone. And he always has a laptop with him, so he didn't think he needed it, but he couldn't get a hold of her. And so we decided, hey, Dad, let's get you a smartphone. We're going to teach you how to use it at 92, teach you how to text. We're going to put the phone numbers in there for each of us, so if you can't find one of us, you can find one of the other, or siblings and that type of thing, and we'll all come to your need if we need to. So that's what we did. Well, Angel spent hours after I tried to teach my dad the best I could to use a smartphone to text and everything. He spent hours teaching my dad how to use the phone. And that was part of their time of kind of getting to know each other. And Angel once again went above and beyond. It's kind of funny because my dad, always being the engineer, he wanted to know how that iPhone worked. So one day I walked in and he's got YouTube on, and there's Steve Jobs up on the screen explaining how the operating system's put together. The rest of us are just trying to figure out how to use an app on the phone. My dad wants to know how it works. It was kind of funny. And Angel was just really instrumental in going over again and again. Okay, this is how you text. This is how you call. My dad thought it was great. He just switched his solitaire from his laptop over to his phone. I kind of shook my head on that one. But it gave him a sense of confidence that he could get a hold of somebody when he needed to. And because my dad had COPD, He really had a hard time breathing. Now, this is an important part of the story. For those of you that have smoked or are smoking, I want you to hear this. My dad had not smoked in 60 years. It was clear back in the Army that he smoked. And yet his lungs were impacted by that smoking 60 years ago. And it gave him the COPD. Unfortunately, when you have this, you have a really hard time breathing. And it creates this anxiety in you because you can't really take a deep breath. And the more that you think about, I can't take a deep breath, the more anxious you become. And you actually have to kind of go through some breathing exercises. We had this thing where we said, to breathe in, smell the roses, breathe in, and then slowly exhale back out. And Angel was really good with working with him. Angel was there for when the doctors came or the nurses came or the physical therapist came, and he would interact with them and give his opinion. They would listen to him. And he helped to kind of determine what type of care he could or could not do, because sometimes they would ask my dad to do things that he just really wasn't capable of. So Angel was just a critical role. And we really didn't know at the time that we were in his final days. And what happened was, unfortunately, at one point in August this last year, that my dad, he got pneumonia. And that really was a problem because of the COPD, not being able to breathe well in the first place. And so the last place we wanted to do was to take my dad back to the hospital because we had such a bad experience. But it was a very dire situation. He just could not get enough air. And we had an oxygen machine and all of that at home. And we kept dialing that thing up higher and higher, but it wasn't enough. So I said, Dad, what do you want to do? And he said, you better take me to the hospital. So I called the paramedics. They came and they took him. And we didn't realize it, but this was going to be his final visit in the hospital. And I can't tell you how important it was to have a caregiver at that final stage of his life as we began to realize that he was failing and that he wasn't going to come out. Do you know, in this story, as I was putting this together, because I happened to be staying with my parents at that time, that I was doing the math on the oxygen machine, and I talked to the pulmonologist and the machine he was on in the hospital. And there was no way we could match the type of oxygen he needed at home moving forward. And so I said to the pulmonologist, what do you think at this point? Be straight with me. And he said he would be a candidate for, what do they call that? That final phase? Anyway, at that point I realized that my dad was never going to come home. And I began to talk to my siblings and to my mom about it. And we began to come up with a plan. And we decided we would meet with the doctors at the hospital, the hospitalist who was in charge of him, and have this difficult conversation that we need to kind of look at end of life. And it was helpful to have Angel to weigh in with his opinion of what's going on. And by the time I got to the hospital to meet everybody, we were going to meet at 1 o'clock at the hospital, all of the siblings and my mom, they had already started end-of-life procedures. And I'm like, what's going on here? We're just going to talk about it. We're not starting it yet. And my dad had made the difficult decision that morning at 5 a.m. and told my mom, you know what? He couldn't swallow at that point. He couldn't even drink water without aspirating. I think he did the math and said, I'm not going to be around for this. And he made the gracious decision of saying, it's okay to let me go. So here we're trying to figure out, gut-wrenching, should we start end-of-life procedures? And my dad makes the call for us, which is just a blessing. So you never know, when you're going to be in this situation with your own parents or some other loved one. And you never know if there's going to be someone like an angel that comes into your life at that last 6 weeks that you need them the most, like what happened to us. His support to us was so invaluable that at my dad's memorial service, I actually mentioned Angel. And Angel on his own accord came to the service and said what a difference he made for us. My dad was one of a kind, but he and Angel became such close friends in such a short period of time. And Angel was always patient there. There was a time I was traveling and my mom needed help with him, and Angel showed up in the middle of the night. And that's making a difference in someone's life when they need you, most. So you just never know. If you're a caregiver yourself, or you're taking care of a loved one, or you're managing this process for your parent or someone else at end of life, these caregivers are important. And sometimes they don't get enough respect. And sometimes they're not treated very well by the family, which is beyond me. But for us, Angel was just the right person for the job, who came in at the right moment when we needed him most. And to us, he really was an angel that was sent to us at the very end of my dad's life. So if you're one of those people and you're wondering whether you make a difference, let me tell you, if you're in that situation, you do. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and that was the story of Angel the caregiver and when he came into our lives at the right moment in time. And if you happen to be looking for a caregiver, I have a friend that has this caregiver agency. Just email me. Here's my email address here, 4islandexpats@gmail.com. I'll put you in contact with her, and they'll get you a caregiver if that's what you need. I just want to throw that out there. So I appreciate you watching this. It was, a difficult time in the lives for my family, for my dad, for my mom, but we've made peace with it. Well, thanks for watching. I made this video for those of you that are caregivers, or you're caring for a loved one, or you're managing this process, or you're starting to go through this process. And I just want you to see the point that one person can make a difference, especially at the end of life of a family member. It's never easy to lose a loved one, whether it's a father or mother, or brother or sister. It's painful. But I know we feel blessed because at the right moment, at the right time, Angel was there for us.